Okay, let's get started. Kat, would you like to introduce yourself and take it from here?
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron. So, hi, everyone, and welcome to our Teams Day online session. Uh, in this session, we are going to be looking at how to get people to use technology in 7 easy steps. Just a bit of an introduction to your speaker today. So, my name is Kat Greenan, and I'm a Microsoft Solutions Specialist and a Microsoft partner. And I have been working there for about 5 years. And started as a customer success manager. So that was very much focused on change management and end user adoption. I now have moved into a solutions specialist role, focusing and specializing in Microsoft Teams. And I work with businesses around the UK in particular, helping with end user adoption of Microsoft Teams. You can see a few links there. So I have a blog, a Teams blog, on how-tos and tips and tricks, and that's collabwithcat.com. So if you did want to check that out, please feel free to. I have also included my email and my Twitter handle, and on the right-hand side here, you can see my LinkedIn QR code. So if you did want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to. I do tend to post updates about Microsoft Teams on LinkedIn. So let's kick off. I just wanted to start with why end user adoption is important now more than ever before, especially in the last 12 months or so, where we have the majority or a lot of the population is now working from home, which is a situation that they're not familiar with. There's a really interesting stat, which is 43% of IT teams have actually seen an increase in the number of support tickets from employees during the period of forced remote work, and that's the BDaily Experience 2020 report. So what we're actually seeing is our staff members and our employees, they're at home, they don't have that technical colleague in the office where they can just go over and ask a question. They're now at home. So all questions are going through to service desk, and those questions might not be technical issues. There might actually be questions around best practice and how to actually use something, which could actually be, helped with a proper change management program. And another big a key trend that we're seeing is that there's a lot of staff members that we have, that might lack confidence to ask for help. And in that same report, it actually showed that 45% of IT issues go unreported by employees. So what that's really showing us is that employees are facing twice as many issues. But IT, we don't really have a way of knowing which users are affected. So there might be, some staff members at home, they're having a poor experience, a poor remote work experience, and they're not being as productive as they could be. Return on investment has always been an important trend and an important thing to consider when we are looking at technology. But now I think budgets are slightly tighter than they have been before. And if you have made an investment to technology, you really want to make sure that you're getting the value from it. And the only way to get value is to actually get your employees using the technology and using it properly to get the most from it. So what we are going to be looking at today is the 7 steps to success. So 7 steps to get people to use technology. And going through these steps, I want to just, showcase why it's important and show you some live examples of things that we've done with customers in the past that have worked quite well. I will link the slides at the end of the session in the chat window, so you'll have a copy of those, and I will have time at the end to answer any questions as well. So let's look at step 1, find your executive sponsor. There was actually a question in the last session about sponsor, so I hope that person has stayed on for this one, because an executive sponsor is someone that you really want to help influence the organization. A powerful leader type role. Someone who there's mentioning in the last session, if you saw this person commenting on posts and Teams, for example, liking things, you would be encouraged to use it also. And when we think about, that type of sponsor, it doesn't necessarily have to be an IT sponsor, like a CTO type role. We have worked with customers in the past, and it has been a finance director, it's been someone, a HR director, who's actually got involved and helped encourage the organization to start utilizing this technology and really get that message out to our employees. And I've included managers in here as key roles for successful user adoption. And the reason for that is because we really want to get managers on board because they can influence their teams. Because when we think about Microsoft Teams, it is something of a behavior change, and having management reinforcement will really make sure that their teams are reading any communication that we share. They're turning up to training. They understand the benefits. So it's really important, first of all, to also get your managers on board with the change. I've included project team on here. Project team comes in various different forms. It doesn't have to necessarily be a project manager, but the project team is the group of people in the organization who are coming together to introduce the technology, to get people using it. And when we've worked with customers, we have seen the project team be members of the HR team. We've seen communication teams, marketing teams, project team, IT, all of these different parts of the business coming together to try and implement this change. Champions are also a key role for successful end user adoption. And I do have a step on champions because they are so important. And that's really where you can scale your message, scale your training, and what you're trying to get across. And champions can really help your co-workers, especially those staff members who are at home and they maybe don't want to necessarily raise tickets or ask for help. Champions can really help support those roles. And I have included an org chart image here. And the reason for that is because with all of these roles, we're making sure that we are scaling down the organization and we have all areas covered. So we have our sponsors, we have our managers, we have our project team, and we have our staff members as well to make sure that that message is truly going through the organization and the change is impacting everyone in the organization, not just a small group of people. So the role of an executive sponsor, I mentioned a powerful leader who can influence, the organization. At core, our sponsor is our CEO, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a C-level type role. It can be someone, as long as they have that influence over the organization. And one way to get your key sponsors on board, things that we have done in the past that have worked quite well, is to show the benefit of using the technology versus the, and the investment that you've made. So we use things like the ROI calculator, which is available on a Microsoft website, which you can show the investment into the technology from Microsoft and the impact of not using that technology to its fullest potential. What we've also used is specific use cases to key sponsors. So we have used the example of, a Microsoft team being created for boardroom meetings, where you have PAs involved, you have different directors in the business, there's a monthly meeting, there's monthly reports and notes that come as part of that, and just showing how easy that is to use in Microsoft Teams versus something like email can really help them get on board as well. So it's showing the benefits and making sure they see the use case for not just the business, but themselves as well. I also wanted to mention that visible and participate is a really important role of an executive sponsor. You need to have that person, in order to be that influencer, they need to be visible. They need to be using the technology. I mentioned earlier, if you want have someone liking and commenting on messages, if the organization can see that, then that is going to impact them and influence them. I just wanted to run through a quick story as well. When we were working with an organization, they were rolling out Microsoft Teams at about Christmas time, and their executive sponsor was doing a speech at the Chris's party, and we said, oh, it'd be great if, he could mention something about Teams in the speech, and we put a little paragraph together. And during the speech, the only thing he managed to say was a little joke at the end, which was, oh, someone's going to make fun of this speech in Microsoft Teams. And that was all he said. But because he was the sponsor, he was the powerful leader or the influencer, everybody at that Christmas party was then, oh, what's Microsoft Teams then? What's this? And became a little bit more interested. So even a little bit of visibility has such a big impact from the sponsors. Sponsors can also help advocate your message to the other leaders. So your powerful leader or your influencer can then make sure that the other leaders in the organization are aware of what we're doing, the why, the benefits, and help them get on board as well. And some key benefits of an executive sponsor. The biggest one is that it can help drive your behavioral change. Teams is a people and behavior change as well as a technology change. And the executive sponsor can really help drive that. They also help reinforce goals. So when we think about the executive sponsor, from their perspective, it's a business decision or an organization decision to work in this way. And so it helps reinforce the goals for your employees. It also helps improve employee engagement. What we actually found was employees have better engagement with the executive sponsor because that executive sponsor is more visible and they're using something like Teams as a collaboration tool. So, that employee can like and comment on their messages, they can connect with them. Whereas before, if they only had something like email, they wouldn't necessarily email that exec sponsor directly. So it's a really great way to improve that relationship between the exec sponsor and staff members as well. So we have our exec sponsor on board. They're happy to be visible. What do we need to do next? Next, we need to recruit a champion network. So what is a champion? What you can see on my slide is a graph with some information about the most effective and most used methods of learning. So if I can just draw your attention to the top left-hand side here, you can see that these methods are underutilized, so they're not used very often, but they have a really high impact. So if you get training or if you're learning from an external trainer, from your manager, or if an IT employee sitting with you and showing you the technology, it's a really high effectiveness of learning. The reason why this is underutilized is simply because of resource and budget and time. If we look to the right-hand side, you can see, the most effective and the most used method of learning is your coworker. It's not a manager, it's not IT, it's not a formal trainer. It's your coworker. It's when you're sitting in the office and you turn around and say, oh, how would you do this? Or how do you like something in Teams? Well, what's the best way to do this? And that's really where you want your champions to be. You want your champions to be that coworker role. So you're getting the correct message out to your employees and you're getting the correct training and the correct way to do something across. And so that's why we want to make sure that we have champions throughout the organization. In terms of how many champions, it really depends on the organization. We tend to see 1 to about 20 employees. And organizations that we work with, typically the spread of champions that they have are, 1 to 2 per business area or per department. But how do we run a champion program? How do we get there? Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to recruit champions. We need to recruit our champions and find out who they're going to be. One of the really important things here is that our champions, we don't want them to be managers. And the reason for that is because one of the things that we want our champions to do is get feedback from their coworkers about the technology. Are they liking it? What's working, what's not, even negative feedback, we really want to hear that from our champions. And so if the champion's a manager, they tend not to get the most truthful feedback from employees. There is a bit of a time commitment in terms of being a champion where you do have to answer questions and help your colleagues. And so it's much better to have someone who can commit that time. recruiting champions, they should be volunteers. So there's nothing worse than forcing something on someone that they don't want to do. And so a couple of things that we've used in the past, and what you can see on my screen are some communication templates to recruit champions. So we have a poster on the left-hand side here. You're a champion, what it's all about, join us now, here's a little bit of information. And on the right-hand side, this is another template that we've used. We're looking for teams champions. We need your help. You're asking the organization for help. Who has, 20 minutes a week, or, who wants to help us get people using this technology? And this one was quite nice because in here we have a little button that opens up a Microsoft form. And that person can fill out their information, and you can get reports based on, who's looking to become a champion. And so one of the key things, yes, volunteer champions always work a lot better than delegated champions in our experience. We also have to train our champions. So when we are creating our champion program, the first thing we do want to do is make sure that they are trained on the technology, not necessarily the buttons, because the buttons will change, but on the best practice. So once you've figured out, how you're going to use Teams and what's the best way to do something, that training should be done with the champions before they start assisting, the rest of the organization. Create a team for your champions. I cannot highly recommend this enough. Let me just show you an example of the University of Liverpool, and I just took a snippet from their Teams environment, which is public, so you can see this online. But what you can see from here is we have a team dedicated to our champions, so anybody who volunteers to be a champion gets added to this team. We have channels for events that we're doing, any training. Champions can be Microsoft certified, problems using Teams, so they can provide feedback, they can ask questions that they might not know the answer to. And the playground is quite nice. It's a channel where the champions can go in and they can play with apps and tabs and, get used to the technology. But what you'll find with the team when you create it, the champions then become a little bit of a community, and they start answering questions from each other. So as the project team, as the team rolling this out, you want to be in the team to see the feedback, but what you'll find is it starts to self-serve. They also included this. I love the University of Liverpool. You could tell what they did with their champion program. They posted information on their extranet. You could also do it on your intranet, where it's, what's the champion program, what's it all about, and it just got interest from, other users in the organization. Oh, what's that? I want to be part of this, community. Animate. What I mean by that is we need to make sure that people know who their champions are. So if you're doing any pieces of communication, make sure that you tell people who their champion is. What we used to do when we worked with a council in the past, they had coloured lanyards where they would have a coloured lanyard for your champions. They would have physical badges. So when you were in the office, you would walk past and you could see who the champions were, which was quite nice. Since we are remote working, we've had to be a little bit more creative with our ways of differentiating who's a champion. So what we have here are just some examples of some badges that you can add to profile pictures. So on the left-hand side here, you can see that I've added a little champion logo. I could add this to my Office 365 profile, so people, they can see it in Teams. They can see it when they're sending me an email, and just see that I'm actually a champion. And again, it just makes the champions feel like they're part of a community, and other employees in the organization will kind of, oh, what's that badge about? I want to be involved in that. And there's some new ones that I've included in here as well. The Teams Change Champion badges that you can also add to things like LinkedIn as well. Reward and motivate your champions is an important one. So we need to, champions are investing their time and getting trained and helping answer questions and provide feedback. So what can we do for them? Well, one thing we can do to help motivate champions is actually get them to become a part of the Microsoft Champion Program, which is a global program that they can be involved in. So it's actually learning about becoming a champion and being a champion, but from a global perspective. And it's something they could take with them. So it's not just specific to the organization, it's something they can add as a skill. It's something that they have, put extra time into. And on the right-hand side, one thing that we've actually used which has worked quite well in the past, is recommendations. So if someone has become a volunteer, has become a champion, they put in lots of time. One way to reward that kind of extra effort is to provide a recommendation on LinkedIn from their manager. And again, it's just things that our employees can take with them as they move roles. So we have our exec sponsors. We've created a champion program, recruited our champions. What we need to do now is think about communication. We need to tell our organization what's happening, when it's happening, and why it's happening. And so we have some best practices for communication. So communication strategy, one thing we want to always encourage is using a variety of tactics. So if you are using your intranet, Yammer, Teams, email, any type of communication that you're using, we encourage you to use all of those, and different types of communication as well. It doesn't have to always be a wordy email. It can be things like an infographic, or it could be a day in the life, these types of colorful communication that we can share. When we are remote working, we've also done things like a demonstration of Teams. So we've done a 20-minute over lunch meeting to see what's coming. Microsoft Teams, where people can ask questions, and it's a sneak peek. And in terms of the frequency of the communication, we have a recommendation of 6 weeks before you deploy a new technology. What we found is a lot of our customers have been using Teams for a year. They've turned it on, and it's now a kind of refresh of communication. And so ideally, you want to have at least one piece of communication a week. We've said about 6 weeks, and you can obviously, make that a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, depending on how frequent you already have communication. And those types of communication, if we say 6 weeks, it's not an email every day for 6 weeks, my goodness. It's just one piece a week. So that is, it might be your executive sponsor who posts a news article on the intranet announcing, Microsoft Teams, this is a new way to use it, or, make sure that we're using it in the right way. And then could be the week after, a manager sends, an email to their team. The week after that, it might be a post on Yammer. So it's different, ways to communicate. And that does lead me on to, who is the sender? I mentioned exec sponsor there. I mentioned manager. We tend to find it works, really well if we have a manager sharing the information with their team, because if I get an email from IT, I tend to not prioritize it. I don't know who else does that. If I get an email or a message from my manager saying, please read this, or this is important, I'm going to prioritize it. I'm going to read it. So think about who is sending out the communication. And focus on the people with them. What's in it for me is something that we would highly recommend. And what I mean by that is we need to focus on the benefits. Why should someone care? Why should they turn up to training? Why should they learn to use the tool? Why should they make an effort? And a couple of ways that we've done this, I'll show you an example of, and this is an email. The organization we were working with did not use SharePoint, they did not use Yammer, and they were rolling out Teams. And so we were left with email. And so we created an email, or we used an email template here, and you can see this is actually their branding. And this was specific to the finance team. And what you can see here is we have 3 key points on here. And we did this for every department in the organization, all the main departments, so HR and sales and legal. And we've said, okay, we're going to communicate 3 benefits of Microsoft Teams. But notice that we don't actually mention the technology. So in here, I've said effectively communicate with your stakeholders, schedule your meetings with your teams, and collaborate on annual reports. And underneath, you can see, oh, this is how you do it. But the point I'm getting across here is we want to show the benefits to the finance team. Why should they want to use this technology? Well, you want to use it because of these three things. If we're talking to the HR team, we'll talk about how they can improve their employee onboarding experience, and then tell them how it's done. But the key thing is showing the benefits, and that's something that tends to work really well in terms of getting people turning up to training, to using it and using it properly. I also just wanted to make you aware of an app that's quite useful when communicating, if you're already using Teams especially. So this is a Teams Communicator app. So in here we have a place where I can create a piece of communication. So here I've got my title, I've added an image, I've got a little blurb in here. And when I click next, what that's actually going to do is send a one-on-one chat message to everybody in my organization. So instead of a company wide email that goes out, that just annoys everyone when they get those, it's a one-on-one chat message, which is a little bit more personal. Everyone gets a notification, and it's just a quite a nice way to get any pieces of communication out there. So just to make you aware of the Teams Communicator app. Okay, so we've told our employees what's happening when it's happening, and why they should care. What we now need to do is tell them how to use the technology. So we need to think about a training plan. And when we think about a training plan, there's a few best practices that have worked quite well. The first couple in here focus on the why and use real work scenarios. So this is very similar to the communication best practices. Make sure that you are focusing on the benefits, how it's actually going to help their day to day. When we first started doing training with teams, one of the biggest things was email reduction. So the amount of emails that you receive and send every day will be reduced heavily. And it's just going to be a little bit more productive in Microsoft Teams. So using examples of things that people can relate to. And use multiple formats if you can. So there is live online sessions. There is, how-to guides. There's a huge amount of resources on a Microsoft website, which I'm going to show you later on, that you can use how-to guides, use multiple formats, and try to make sure that we have training available for all our employees. While we're doing this, a couple of just considerations really is, are you deprecating any old technology? We're working with quite a few customers at the moment where they are upgrading from Skype for Business to Teams. And so we do need to think about training and communication around what's happening with Skype versus Teams and the comparison and how it's going to work. So just make sure that's a consideration. How technical are your employees? If you need to do different levels of training, that might be a consideration. And the other one on here, are there any other change programs? So is there a new HR portal that's come out that everyone's doing training on, or is there something new that people have to learn? Because then they might not be able to commit as much time to training for this particular technology. And in terms of the when, so making sure that we're aligning a training strategy throughout. So make sure that we're training our core team. So this is your managers, sponsors, champions, and your project team. Then looking at IT preparation for our service desk or the help desk. Do they need any formal accreditation? Are they aware of the questions they're going to get from employees? And then looking at the business groups. When we were back in the office, we would do in-person training, but there's obviously online training and webinars. Brown bag sessions is, I believe it's quite an American term there, but there are brown bag sessions, which is kind of like a learn at lunch for those who are based in the UK. And the key thing here, I think, is ongoing engagement. So we don't want to do all of this work, tell everyone about the technology, get everyone really excited, do a training session, and that's it. We want to make sure that we're refreshing everyone, especially with something like Teams, where there are new updates quite often because it's quite a new product. Doing lunch and learn sessions, even tips and tricks, sending a tip and trick out every week or every twice a month, so people are aware of what they can actually do with Teams. What you could also do is use Microsoft Forms as a knowledge check. So if you have Office 365 licensing, you'll have access to Microsoft Forms where you can create your own quizzes. And in here, I've got an example of a quiz for Microsoft Teams. It's just another way to make sure that people are trained and they're actually taking in the training as well. I mentioned the site. This is the site. I'm going to post this link in the chat after the session. You can see here we have a huge amount of resources. So this is for Teams, but we have instructor-led training, knowledge checks, on-demand training, and the user adoption section has a huge amount of communication templates. So some of those screenshots I showed you earlier, we actually used the communication templates from Microsoft. They provide a huge amount of free resources, which I definitely recommend you look at. And it's not just for Microsoft Teams, it's actually for any app in Office 365. I'll post that link at the end. Next step is resistance management. We have done communication. We've got our sponsors there. We've got our champions. And ideally, once you've gone through all of those steps, you shouldn't have a huge amount of resistance. But there has not been one organization that I have worked with who has not had some kind of resistance from their employees. And it's to be expected. It's completely normal. But there is, it's useful to have a resistance management technique in place before you start getting resistance. And some of the resistance themes that we hear, I'm sure some of you might have heard these as well, is it's another tool. So we already use SharePoint, we use Yammer. My goodness, it's just another tool that we have to learn and have to use. I just don't have the time. I don't have the time to learn. I can't turn up to training. I'm using something the way that I always use it, and it works for me. I'm not going to spend time learning something new. I don't have the confidence to learn something new. Maybe the technical literacy is quite low, which does affect quite a lot of employees. And so they might not have the confidence to use the tool, to understand the training, and to ask for help. Lack of management reinforcement is a huge one. My manager doesn't use it, so why should I? Is some of the, it's the biggest reason why we get so much resistance is the lack of management reinforcement. And sometimes the change just is not desirable. People just don't like change. It is human nature. And so that is some of the resistance themes that we have seen. But if you have heard any other resistance themes, please pop them in the chat. I would love to hear them. And hopefully we can look at some techniques now to help overcome some of those. So the techniques that we have found works. Unfortunately, there's not an easy secret sauce to overcome resistance. There's just some things that we can look at to help. So the biggest thing is focusing on the benefits. If you've taken anything from today's session, it will be the benefits of Teams or of any technology. And this tends to get over a lot of resistance. We have worked with an organization where I actually had to sit with one of their employees who was one of the directors of the organization, and it was impacting that team because of lack of management reinforcement. So I went in and I actually sat down at his desk and I showed him the benefits of Teams, and he would connect to a different office in a different country. So we were just showing him how easy it is to now have meetings with them more often. And as soon as he saw the benefits, he was more likely to use it. So when I say focus on the benefits, it works in our experience anyway. And again, that management reinforcement, it is crucial. So it comes down from the sponsor, down to the managers, down to the team. If my manager told me to turn up to some training or made sure if he started using the technology and tagging me in things, I'm more going to use it than not. Feedback in here. So what I mean by that is make sure that you know which resistance themes you're actually getting. So we tend to use surveys. So we survey our users, to see if they're enjoying the technology, if they have issues, if they would change anything. And also use your champions to get that feedback as well. What resistance themes are you getting? Because then you can actually find out, do we need to do a refresher session? Do we need to do an extra training session? Because from the feedback, there's about 5 things that keep coming up as issues, and there's an easy solve for them, but it's just a case of training that to make sure our users are aware. So we could do a refresher session on just those 5 things. So they're quite useful. Step 6, rewards and recognition. So if it has been, we've put all of this effort in, we've done our training, we've introduced teams, people are using it, a few months down the line, you might want to reinforce rewards and recognition. And rewards and recognition could be things like, thank you to the champions that the organization can see. It could be, again, things like that LinkedIn reference. It could be a number of things. But one thing that we want to do is make sure that we're recognizing our employees for using the technology and rewarding them as well. And some of the key benefits of that is it reinforces the change. So, 6 months down the line, it's reinforcing that change. And it also helps with your resistors. So those people who really don't want to get involved using the technology, doing things like, oh, well done to John, he was, worked really well, being a champion this week, it really helped his team. Other people see that and they want to get involved. It provides value and meaningful praise to improve employee engagement. So I'll show you in the next slide, but we use something at Core called Praise a Colleague in Teams. So anybody can kind of praise their colleague to say they've done a really good job. And so that just really increases your employee engagement. And it's also quite nice to bring a bit of a social element to Teams as well, because we use things like praise and emojis and GIFs and memes and all of these things in our day-to-day communication. We might as well, use that in our work communication. It's a great way to get personalities across, to make things just less formal. We're all working from home. People on cameras have, dogs and kids running in the background. It just makes us more human, and it helps build relationships better. And so it's always a positive, in my view anyway, to make sure that we do bring a social element. And just to show you some snippets, so there is a Teams Achievers. So this is recognizing our staff for doing, something really good, or they responded really quickly today, or they did a really great task. The praise that I mentioned as well. So praise a colleague, you can tag your colleague in there as well so they can see it. And at Core, what we do is we have a bi-weekly meeting, all company meeting, where we read out some of that praise from the week as well, which tends to help. There's also doing things like games and challenges. So is there something that we can do to, just again, reinforce that change? We can create challenges, and you can see this is actually using Microsoft Forms. We can have things like leaderboards. We've seen scavenger hunts and bingo and lots and lots of things that we can do. Obviously, it does depend on your culture of the organization. Not every customer I speak to wants to do this. But again, bring that social element, reinforce that change, and make it a little bit fun, which helps with your resistance. It helps with getting people on board as well. And finally, the last step, step 7, I am just in time as well, is adoption monitoring. We need to make sure that we are measuring our success. Are people using it? If not, we need to maybe, change the plan. So in here, we have in your Office 365 Admin Center. So if you're an administrator of your tenant, you can access your adoption pack on Office 365, which will show you what people are, using. Are they using Teams? Are they using email? What are they doing? And what we tend to find is if a lot of customers' email usage goes down and their Teams usage goes up. And that's a great measure of success because it's reducing the noise from email and it's moving those conversations into something more appropriate like Teams. There is also a productivity score, which I want to make you aware of. So it's in your tenant. Again, if you're excuse me, an administrator, you can go into your reports and you can view your productivity score. And your score here is actually benchmarked against similar sized organizations to you. And what you can see is how people are communicating, what tools are they using, what tools are they using for meetings, how are people collaborating on their files, how many people are working together. And it's not, the idea is not to spy on your employees. The idea really is to understand how the technology is being used and the technology experiences of your employees. So then we can see, okay, so since we've actually deployed Teams, we can see that people are, they're having more chats, they're having less emails, they're collaborating more, they're being more productive. It's a really great way just to measure the experience your organization is having with the tools, that you've made quite a big investment to. So I would recommend checking this report out as well in your admin center. So that is everything that I wanted to cover, the 7 steps to get people to use technology. Hopefully the session has been useful for you. We do have some time now for questions and feedback. And obviously your feedback is always valued, so please feel free to use the QR codes there for event feedback and the specific speaker session feedback. But hopefully if you might follow these 7 steps and you'll hopefully get people using technology more than they were before. But thank you very much, and I'll hold now for some questions. I can see we have a resistance theme. It does not work. I have also seen this, and sometimes it's not because it doesn't work, it just doesn't do exactly what that person wants. It's something very, very specific that they're asking it to do, and it's just not built for that purpose. And so we have to explain, this is why the tool was built. It wasn't built for, you're using it, thinking about using it in the wrong way. So yes, I have heard that as well. And yes, especially remote working, we have had people, Teams is cutting out, and we actually have to do bandwidth tests with them to be like, okay, so try and sit closer to your monitor. But yes, we have seen that before. Thank you very much.
Robert also had a question. He asked, what is the weekly program in the team about?
What do you mean, sorry?
In the chat, Robert asked, what is the weekly program in Teams about? I don't know if you see that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean, Robert. Sorry, I don't know if you're able to. Oh, right. Let me go back a few slides then. Thank you. I was like, which team are we looking at? Okay, so let me go back here. That's the only thing when you have lots of animations in your Oh, I see. Yes, let me go back. So it's really, so they had like a weekly basically like a weekly project update. So every week they would basically separate their feedback, separate the communication that they're doing, separate the training that they were doing, because it was with students as well as educators. They did have to make it a little bit more managed. So they had a week for everything they were doing, because there was a huge amount of communication going out, a huge amount of training that was being done across, it's quite a large university, so they just had to manage it a little bit better. And you can also do that as well if you did prefer, because there was things that they would have to do, like putting things on their extranet and for parents and so on. So it's a bigger piece of work. But thanks for clarifying. And yes, I do have the resources about the forms. So the form, we can give you a couple of examples, definitely. I can definitely send the links to all of the communication templates and the badges and things like that. So I'll grab those and I'll pop those in the chat now. Yeah, as we just on your point there, Dwayne. So when the program is kind of rolled out, what we tend to find is that the channels get deleted after a while. They're not required, or they move to final resting place because we don't need them as much. No, so it's not something that they can reply to. You can add in a link if they want to reply and provide feedback, but no, it won't be a case of getting thousands like large scale emails. It's trying to get rid of that. Get rid of that problem. But yeah, you can put yes. There would be no point then. But yes, exactly. It would be you can put a link to say if you've got any questions, please ask John, or here's a link to to ask a question. The reply all horror that we tend to get into with all company emails is just is what we're trying to get rid of. Let me get those resources for you. Is there a max number of recipients you could target a particular group? I believe so, yes. So if you didn't want to send a chat message to the entire organization, then yes, you could decide to actually send it to a specific group of people, and those groups will be taken from, I believe it's Azure AD, they'll take the groups from instead of the entire company. But I think the reason it was there was to, as a kind of, an FYI type of communication that you're sharing, instead of an email, it would just be through a chat message, which is just they'll get a notification and so on as well. So let me share some of these links. Yeah, that's a really good point. Emergency notification scenarios, yeah, definitely. Let me just go to my resources. So you have that there. Yeah, I think one of the things that we found is first thing in the morning, instead of opening up Outlook, it's Teams that we open up now. Even down to the activity tab. So when you open your email, you have a list of unread emails, and you have to sift through and find out which ones are relevant, which ones are tasks, and which ones you're just in there as an FYI. Whereas if you open up Teams, you go to activity, it's all relevant to you. So it's always where someone's replied to you or asked you a question or asked you to do something or liked something or responded. So even just moving all of that, FYI stuff into Teams, it just becomes a little bit more focused, which is quite a big benefit. And now we're going to have, with Viva Connections, we're going to have our intranet and Teams as well. They're the only other application we'll need to use is Outlook every so often. So just on that link that I posted, so this is this exact site where you will have all of the training, and in the tools for adoption, that's where you'll find all of the communication templates that I've shared with you. And there's a champions section in there as well, so you'll be able to see badges and communication for champions in there as well. It's such a great resource. And it was one of the things that Microsoft have always provided really great resources, but especially in the last 12 months, it's really amped up because there's lots of people remote working who need the training and need the support. So it's a really great resource. There is administrator training as well. So if you are an admin, there is administrator. So I'll send a link. So the name is Communicator app, but it's actually on GitHub. So there's a little bit of work to do. Instead of just a kind of application that you would just quickly add from the store, there's a little bit of work to get that set up, because it's sending communication to users in the organizations and groups in the organization. There's a little bit of work to do to set it up beforehand, but I can send a link to you as well, so you can see that.
Well, I have a question for you, Kat. A lot of companies went to considerable trouble to create that informal creativity, in kind of rooms, water coolers and stuff. How do you explain how Teams facilitates that kind of informal creativity that exists face to face?
So, yes, we've seen replacements for water cooler chats. So I guess the biggest thing is chat. Teams chat is, if we are, chatting to our colleagues, asking questions, that's a kind of thing that we do now, instead of when we're in the office, we're going for a coffee, we'll ask someone questions there. We tend to do that in Teams chat and have that informal kind of conversation there instead of in the team. We have also done sessions like, lunchtime sessions, half an hour, where we've got the team on, where we just have a kind of catch up and a chat. There's those types of things that just, not everything will replace in-person meetings, but they're just ways to have that kind of informal conversation.
Any other questions from anyone else as we wrap this up?
Perfect, thank you.
Well, thank you, Kat, for delivering such a compelling presentation on Teams. Let's see if we can't get a gallery here. If everyone can turn on their cameras. There we go. I think we have almost everyone. Anyone else want to share? There we go. Thank you. Don't be shy. Perfect. All right. Well, we'll do a say cheese. Everyone on 3, 2, 1. Smile. Perfect. Kat, any closing remarks that you'd like to share as we leave?
I would just say thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you found the session useful.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
Great job, Kat. Thank you so much.
Great job.